The veil parts. Arise, and let the stars witness our ascension.
It is important to understand that the Great Concordat is not a benevolent organization. Neither is it particularly wicked. It is not built to be good, though it certainly strives in that direction. It is not built to be cruel, though many of its laws have been twisted to perform acts of shocking brutality. It is built primarily to endure, to stand as a bulwark against barbarism and anarchy, and in this purpose it is extraordinarily effective. The Concordat has accumulated millennia of customs, rituals, and traditions that trail in the wake of its stately passage through history. Its administrators spend thankless lifetimes wading through the accumulated weight of precedent. It could be argued that as superfluous as so many of these traditions appear, they provide the institution with a certain inertia that holds it as steady as any treaty or threat of force. It is one such tradition that concerns us today, and its peculiar history with one of the Concordat's most recent members. When humanity finally crossed the boundaries of its modest territory and became known to the galaxy's most esteemed institution, we explained to them the custom. When a new species joins the Concordat, it selects an epithet suited to its particular qualities. Each name is a point of pride. It speaks to a race's history, not merely the history of its civilizations, but of its evolution. What gave it the strength to drag itself from the morass of base existence up to the stars? The names follow a simple scheme. The Brethani, whose crystalline architecture reaches toward distant suns, became those who build upward. The Mordai, who evolved from nomadic herds into traveling city fleets, chose those who journey together. The Rit, a telepathic collective functioning in perfect synchronicity, adopted those who are one. It is a foolish tradition, as so many are, and yet, like so many others, there dwells within it a curious truth. A name is a promise. A warrior of those who die gloriously is likely to go down fighting for little more reason than to maintain the reputation of their species. More than anything, the name displays what a race is most proud of, or most aspires toward. So the topic of which name humanity would choose dominated Concordat discussion for cycles on end. Their selection would provide valuable insight for diplomacy, trade agreements, and more than a few entertainment ventures. Those who approach with caution are hardly going to be drawn in by gambling advertisements after all. The humans made their decision with almost indecent haste. After only a handful of cycles, their representative took his place before the Concordat Senate to be formally inducted among our ranks. "Call us," they said, "those who pursue." It was a title that reignited gossip for cycles afterward. Biologically, it made a certain sense. The upright primates were built for sustained locomotion, moving with a loping efficiency that served their purposes. But there were 1,000 other names they might have chosen. What kind of species names itself for the act of chasing? What kind of promise does that make? The following cycles only reinforced the question. The Terrans proved to be a species unusually averse to direct conflict. Where others fought, they negotiated. Where others seized, they offered concessions. When pressed between opposing forces, they consistently managed to find some third path toward peaceful resolution. This manner earned them many friends, but few genuine allies. Who could rely on the conflict-averse when crisis came? When no peace could be found, when the moment arrived to hold a line, who could trust those who had always found a way around? Perhaps it was the name that emboldened the Vashkai in the end. No species occupied a more controversial position in the Concordat than the Vashkai. They had sparked conflicts and chaos for their own benefit repeatedly, yet proven their worth just as repeatedly when the Concordat required the application of serious force. Their evolution as apex pack predators was reflected in their lightning assault fleets and their ruthless political maneuvering. One way or another, the Vashkai had well earned their epithet, those who scourge. It is perhaps unfair to judge every individual by their species' reputation. Certainly there had been Vashkai known for genuine kindness and generosity, but a name is a promise, and centuries within the Concordat had not entirely distanced them from their most predatory practices. The root causes of the conflict that followed are, as with all historical conflicts, difficult to pin precisely. The Vashkai were looking to expand their holdings, and the relatively undeveloped Terran territories were enormously tempting. The Vashkai ruling dynasty was also managing internal dissent among its aristocracy and required a unifying external cause. Their economic influence had diminished from recent trade restrictions, and they desired an opportunity to remind the Concordat of their military strength. Or perhaps they had simply done it to too many young species before and saw no reason the pattern should not repeat. Those of us sympathetic to the humans recognized the web being drawn around them too late. Over 100 minor disputes, each carefully engineered, each placing the Terrans in the position of apparent aggressor. The Terrans had been in the Concordat a handful of cycles. The Vashkai had navigated its legal architecture for centuries. They fitted humanity's noose with considerable grace. The ritual is called Vardok. It places one Concordat member against another, with no aid or intervention from outside parties permitted. In theory, it allows the resolution of disputes without triggering the cascade of alliance obligations that historically turned minor conflicts into galaxy-spanning catastrophes. In practice, it is primarily used to isolate a vulnerable species from its potential allies and destroy it at leisure. It is a savage tradition from the Concordat's earliest, most brutal period, but age lends inertia to tradition, and it has proven frustratingly difficult to remove from the legal framework. To invoke Vardok requires highly specific conditions to be met. The Vashkai had spent years engineering exactly those conditions, constructing an elaborate picture framing the Terrans as aggressors and themselves as aggrieved parties, on paper at least. And in an institution as bound by precedent as the Concordat, paper was the most effective witness. When every piece had been placed, the Vashkai ambassador Sereth took the floor of the Concordat Congress under the eyes of 1,000 assembled delegates. The Terran senator, a quiet man named Ambassador Osei, rose and begged the Vashkai to reconsider. They were a young species, he said. This war, and everything that followed from it, would define the future of both races. The Vashkai laughed in his face. The sound of Vashkai laughter disturbs most other species in a room. Few predators have ascended to full sentience, and the sight of their layered teeth stirs fears buried beneath the surface of civilization. Sereth produced an elaborate document, the formal declaration of war, and cast it at the Terrans' feet. It is Vardok. Embrace us not, our gifts are blades. Call not to your allies, for their doors are closed to you. Sue not for terms, for they shall be denied. Flee to your dens, gather what strength you possess, and make your stand. We are coming. The Terrans had a modest fleet, sufficient for deterring pirates along their trade corridors, little more. When war was declared, they began the long process of warship production, factories dormant since before humanity's unification, cranking back to life. But it would be many cycles before those ships could form meaningful defense across their systems, and the Vashkai had spent years preparing for exactly this window of vulnerability. They chose their first target carefully. Humanity's homeworld was well defended, nearly a third of their available forces concentrated there. Earth could be taken eventually, but the losses would be enormous. They needed a symbol, something that would shatter Terran resolve in a single decisive strike, something the humans treasured so deeply they could not conceive of its loss. The planet was called Ilara. Ilara was humanity's attempt to be better than their history. Its citizens were wardens rather than rulers. The forests stood tall. The animals moved freely across plains of tall grass that stretched from one horizon to the other. The planet represented everything humanity aspired toward, an apology in soil and atmosphere for what they had done to their original home. Those who scourge descended upon Ilara without warning. For the first time in their history, Ilara's residents looked up to see fire and a night sky that had never known it. The Terrans fought with courage and desperation. It did not matter. Within hours, the Vashkai had taken the planet. They took no captives, they claimed no prizes, they landed no colonists. They glassed the cities with sustained plasma bombardment and ignited the atmosphere. The forests burned, the seas boiled, the animals died in bewildered silence.
Humanity's most beautiful achievement became a lifeless rock. The Vashkai sent word of what they had done. The message was intended to inform the Terrans that there was no act prohibited under Vardok. Their only hope of survival lay in unconditional surrender. The counterattack, when it came, was larger than anyone had anticipated. The Vashkai had modeled it precisely, one furious retaliatory strike, the wounded animal lashing out, followed by progressive weakening as their limited military capacity was ground down. They understood this kind of war. What they did not understand was what they were looking at when the Terran fleet materialized above their stronghold at Varoth Station.
1,000 vessels, not warships, cargo haulers, mining platforms, transport ships, ore carriers, now bristling with improvised weaponry. Rotating projectile launchers, single-shot railguns, salvaged missile arrays bolted onto hulls never designed for combat. The Vashkai, who were genuine connoisseurs of military hardware, learned a human word that day: technicals. They also learned that a plasma cutter designed for asteroid mining, when mounted on a ship piloted by someone with nothing left to lose, is a reasonably effective weapon, and that a cargo hauler with empty magazines can still be used to worry the flanks of a battlecruiser until something critical fails. Varoth Station fell within a single subcycle. This alone was not catastrophic. Vashkai military doctrine was aggressively offensive. They put little faith in defense. They had lost ground, but would make it back. The Terran spirit had been broken. The next engagement would be easier. Except it was not easier. At Mareth, the Vashkai were stopped. At Rokos, the Vashkai Agricultural Center, the Terrans took and held the planet. A daring assault on Port Salon, intended to cripple Terran transit capacity, was turned back. Then the humans took the Vashkai shipyards at Baraveth, and the calculus shifted permanently. The Terrans were building genuine warships now. Fast, efficient, terrifying. Their lines traced with a cruel elegance that the Vashkai, in quieter moments, could appreciate as craftwork. Shields that absorbed Vashkai fire without comment. Weapons that tore Vashkai vessels apart at engagement ranges where their own weapons could not yet reach. At every battlefield, Vashkai commanders looked at those ships and measured their own destruction in them. On the floor of the Concordat Congress, the Vashkai ambassador finally called for a new motion. His bearing remained proud, his expression controlled, but there was a hesitance that had not been there before. The war, he said, had cost both parties sufficiently. The Vashkai had demonstrated their capabilities. Vardok would be called off. Both species would withdraw to their respective systems, and Concordat relief provisions would be applied to war-affected territories. It was, from a certain perspective, a generous offer. The Terrans had fought unexpectedly well. They had even expanded their holdings in the conflict, something almost no young species had managed against the Vashkai. Already other Concordat members were quietly approaching the Terrans with alliance proposals, eager to recruit their remarkable new warships for their own purposes. But they were still a fraction of the Vashkai's strength. No amount of tactical ingenuity or righteous fury could close that gap indefinitely. Against the Vashkai defending their core systems, the Terrans could not maintain their momentum. The offer was the sensible choice. Ambassador Osei walked slowly to the center of the floor. He reached into his uniform and produced a small piece of material. As he unfolded it carefully, the assembled delegates recognized what it was: a fragment of a flag, charred at every edge, recovered from a field of blackened glass that had once been a living world. He placed it at the Vashkai ambassador's feet. "Vardok," he said quietly, "the blade cuts both ways. You began this ritual. You shall see it finished. Call not to your allies, for their doors are closed to you. Sue not for terms, for they shall be denied. Flee to your dens, gather what strength remains to you, and make your stand." He looked up. "We are coming." The war continued. The Vashkai tried every strategy that centuries of warfare had taught them: elaborate ambushes, coordinated strikes at supply lines, glorious last stands.
The Terran dreadnoughts could still be trapped, tricked, dragged down by superior numbers. Their burned husks became a familiar sight among the Vashkai territories. But it was never enough. For every Terran ship destroyed, more arrived. The human capacity for production had converted entirely to war, and the pace of their output was beyond anything the Vashkai models had projected. Quietly, the other Concordat nations withdrew their offers of alliance to the Terrans. We mourned them as victims, cheered them as underdogs. Now we feared them as something we did not have a comfortable category for. We remembered, belatedly, what Ambassador Osei had said at the very beginning. This war and everything that follows will define the future of both races. We remembered how desperately he had argued for peace. Only now did we understand precisely what he had been trying to hold back. The Terrans did not destroy the planets they captured. They burned the shipyards and launching infrastructure, crippled military capacity, and moved on, cutting a line directly toward the Vashkai homeworld of Kathos. Its fall was an echo of every battle before it, differing only in scale. The Vashkai fought with everything they possessed. When the sun rose over Kathos' ancient capital, it shone through the haze of orbital debris on a Terran flag. The Vashkai royal family, whose dynasty stretched back through their entire recorded history, had slipped away before the first Terran ship appeared above Kathos. The Terrans took the next system where they had fled, then the next. The royal family fragmented, some hiding among the general population, some purchasing refuge from other nations in violation of Vardak's provisions, some retreating to the outer pirate territories that paid no allegiance to Concordat law. The Terrans followed each one of them. Where force was insufficient, they used intelligence. Their agents infiltrated safe houses with an aptitude that bordered on uncanny. Nations sheltering Vashkai nobles were quietly confronted, surrender the fugitives or face exposure of the violation. In the outer territories, Terran vessels swept through pirate holdings with a sustained ferocity that made even veteran outlaws recalculate their loyalties and surrender the fugitives to end the campaign. The last free member of the Vashkai royal line, the king's son, Prince Devon Sarath, fled to the planet Ubala, whose unique ionic atmosphere disabled any technology beyond the most primitive. His ship died on entry. His equipment failed on landing. He descended with a parachute and nothing else. He was Vashkai, apex predator, evolved to dominate. Ubala was wild and harsh but manageable. He could survive here. The Terrans would not follow him into a place where their technology was useless. He held that certainty close on cold nights and difficult days. It kept him going for nearly a full cycle. Then he saw the Terran ship descending from orbit and felt the certainty dissolve. The ship crashed, as they always did in Ubala's atmosphere, but its pilot survived the landing. A single human woman, carrying nothing but her flight suit and one knife. She looked at the wreckage of her only way home. Then she turned toward the open plains and began to run. The chase that followed became, in later centuries, the subject of historical archives, dramatic reconstructions, and considerable philosophical discussion. It went on for years. Ubala was vast, and the hunter had landed as close to the prince's position as she could manage, which reduced the distance from impossible to merely very large. She had no tracking devices, no vehicle, no medical supplies. Neither did he.
The Vashkai are ambush predators. They are built for explosive acceleration, a single devastating burst of speed that determines whether the prey lives or dies. A slow Vashkai can outpace a fast human on their worst day. But humans are not built for bursts of speed. They are built for something else entirely. The prince became aware of this slowly, over the course of his endless flight. She ran slowly. She simply did not stop. He could outpace her easily, put distance between them, collapse with exhausted legs, and when he woke, she had closed the gap. He used every technique his ancestors had developed across thousands of years of hunting, crossing water to break his scent, doubling back, using rocky ground to hide his trail, constructing traps from whatever materials the environment offered. She saw through every stratagem as though she had invented them herself. She tracked him by the angle of broken vegetation and the direction of the wind. She dismantled his traps without pausing. Perhaps if he had turned and faced her directly, he might have prevailed. He was still a predator by nature, and she was armed with only a knife. But his courage had been used up. His homeland was occupied, his family was imprisoned, his species had been broken apart. He could not hope to defeat her any more than his civilization had been able to defeat hers. In the end, all he could do was run. And she was so much better at that. She occupied every waking moment of his thoughts. He could not escape her even in sleep. Closer and closer she came, across weeks and months and then years of open ground, until finally he had nothing left, crawling through dry scrubland, too exhausted for fear, almost grateful when she finally caught him and placed the blade at his throat. The technology required to create a temporary window in Ubala's ionosphere is not beyond imagination. It could be achieved by a substantial team of scientists with sufficient motivation. It is an extraordinary expenditure of resources for the purpose of capturing a single individual. Two figures emerged from that window when it finally opened, a human woman and her Vashkai prisoner, arriving at the predetermined landing site exactly 10 years after her ship had first crashed on the planet's surface. The war ended shortly after. We watched with considerable anxiety as the Terrans determined the fate of the Vashkai people. They might claim the entire Vashkai territory as conquest. They might impose vassalage. They had proven themselves capable of sustained, merciless prosecution of war. No act had been prohibited under Vardok, and they had used that freedom fully. They did none of what we feared. The royal family was transported to the ruins of Ilara, the world they had ordered destroyed, where the first Terran restoration teams were already beginning the centuries-long process of returning life to the glassed surface. The royals would work that soil for the remainder of their lives. The remaining Vashkai nobility, those without direct culpability for Ilara, were gathered on Kathos, the ruling dynasty that had continued unbroken through their entire recorded history was dissolved. Their territory was divided into 12 separate nations whose internal disagreements would occupy their political energy for the foreseeable future. In the floor of the Concordat Congress, the Terran senators submitted the motion. The war had proven its point. Vardok was ended. Aid could now be extended. The 12 new Vashkai subdelegates raised no objection. In the hours afterward, I had the opportunity to meet with Ambassador Osei. Most species were giving him considerable distance. Their overwhelming victory had earned more fear than admiration, and he sat alone. I gathered my courage and approached. He welcomed the company. "You're braver than most," he said. "When we were weak, I had many friends. Now that we are strong, I expect a lonely future." "Can you blame us?" I asked. "We could never have imagined what you were capable of." "We haven't had to be warriors for a long time," he said. "But we never forgot how." He paused. "A name is a promise, after all." "Those who pursue," I said. It seemed at first such an odd choice. He smiled, and for the first time I noticed the teeth at the corners of his mouth, slightly sharper than I had previously observed. That was actually a translation error. Our device malfunctioned during the initial submission. By the time we realized the mistake, it seemed too trivial to correct. He looked out at the Concordat floor, still processing the end of the war. He turned back to me. "It's not those who pursue," he said. "It's those who never stop chasing."